PM News with us.
Afternoon, Alicia.
Now, Sophie, yesterday the president raised some concerns about the image of the country. Did the attacks really damage our image, and how?
Well, the reality is the story was reported worldwide, and indeed there are negative signs. You saw in Nigeria at the MTN headquarters, but also MultiChoice, and also our High Commissioner in Abuja and in Lagos. There were reports, people gathering there. You saw in Ghana, the ambassador there, Mama Lulu Kungwana, saying that there were people trying to attack the embassy, but fortunately the security was tight. You saw what happened in Harare, the march last week Friday. In Mozambique, you saw the trucks that are supposed to transport goods from South Africa or to the neighboring countries, but also to the entire continent, you know, being stoned there, but also cars coming from Mozambique to South Africa. So clearly, it did, or the story was reported extensively, and there's some websites, reports and updates every hour or minute about what's happening in the country. But fortunately, as the president indicated, that all South Africans hands on deck to ensure that we communicate the message that not all South Africans are involved in such acts. Indeed, the message is beginning to turn the tide, because people are saying, hey, wait, it's not everybody. You know, today the march will really assist us with 25,000 people gathering in town in Johannesburg. In the Eastern Cape, you saw Premier Masole in Cape Town and in Durban, in the Free State, students, you know, all over the country. You know, it's not the 50 million population that's engaged in such acts. Therefore, it's important that we continue to tell the story from the South African perspective, report objectively, not taking sides or hiding facts, but responsibly.
Absolutely. I mean, it has sparked an international outcry. We saw today they marched to the South African embassy in Washington, D.C. Ma'am Sophie, starting from the SADC region, how do we then rebuild our image as a country that is part of the SADC region and also, you know, held as a leader in most things? Currently,
South Africa is the chair of the organ on politics and security in the SADC region. Therefore, President Zuma has got a platform to communicate the message to his peers that this is the situation, these are the causes, this is what we are doing. And fortunately, next week, there is a SADC region meeting in Harare. The meeting is supposed to focus on development in the region, but also on issues of intertrade. But unfortunately, the events are likely to dominate the meeting. Therefore, South Africans, the delegation, the business, the politicians will be there, civil society will be there. They'll be able to explain the story. And of course, many heads of states from SADC region will be there. They can ask questions directly from President Zuma, and he will have an opportunity to explain.
Ma'am Sophie, globally in the US, in Europe and in Asia, how do we then ensure that the country communicates its measures, its current measures, and what South Africans are currently doing to try and oust out and stamp out xenophobia?
We have South Africa outside South Africa. I'm talking about the embassies. It's up to ambassadors out there to really communicate the message, what we are doing, what were the causes, where are we currently. And therefore, I believe that they will have an opportunity to interact with different communities where they are based. And that's the only way to do it. Secondly, you have United Nations. We have ambassador at the UN, who can call all the ambassadors at the UN, explain what happened, and therefore the ambassadors will be able to send reports to their countries and therefore report what's happening and what we are doing. But also, we expect the globe or the world to assist us to deal with this, not only to criticize South Africa, but also make recommendations in terms of how we can deal with this. Because it's not a South African problem. It's the problem that is kind of being felt worldwide. You saw what happened in Europe, where we have this problem of many Africans who perish in the Mediterranean Sea, where they want to cross to Europe to look for greener pastures. And it's the same thing here. In the south, they drive, they use trains, they use cars, they use flights, and they don't perish in seas. But when they arrive here, there's that kind of conflict of interest. But it's a problem globally. How do you deal with the issue of poverty worldwide? And I'm happy that the World Economic Forum that will be in Cape Town very soon, it is going to focus on how to reach the gap between the poor and the rich, which is a problem worldwide. And I think the leaders who converge in Cape Town at the World Economic Forum will be able to grapple with such challenges and also advise us what to do, because we really have to close the gap between the rich and the poor.
Ma'am Sophie, before I let you go, your advice to media as our foreign editor, I mean, it was apparently the King's speech that was misinterpreted, that apparently led to this whole controversy. Your advice to media when covering such stories?
Well, clearly, when you are going to send a journalist to a story where a newsmaker is going to express herself or himself in an African language, send a person who's competent in that language. It's not about sending a black journalist or a white journalist or a Xhosa journalist or a Sotho journalist or an Afrikaans journalist, a person who is competent in that language. Because what we normally do, we go to these rallies, a person decides to speak in Tsonga, I don't understand Tsonga, I start asking people around me, and they give me a misinterpretation. I'm not saying that's what happened. I don't know, I was not there. I've never had the privilege to listen to the audio where I can make my own informed decisions. Fortunately, I'm competent in Nguni. I can be able to understand what the King said, but I've never had an opportunity to look at that. But this is advice. Get a person who's competent in the language, irrespective of color, creed.
Absolutely.
But sometimes it's very difficult. For example, from international perspective, you go to Burkina Faso, it's French. Can't understand French, and we have very few South African journalists who are competent in that language. So it will continue to be a challenge.
Thank you so much for that advice. That is, of course, our foreign editor, Ms. Sophie Mokoena, on the repercussions of xenophobia on South Africa itself. In other news, the anti-xenophobia ground